Hello and welcome to another video, and this time we are practicing a write an account question on the arms race, the 1950s, and perhaps a little bit of space race as well. Okay, so in this video we're going to recap our knowledge in a moment about the arms race and the space race, and then we're going to work out how to do the write an account question. It's not everyone's favourite question, so let's have a good practice of it and develop our skills. So find those pages on the arms race and the space race, and let's go to the quiz. Okay, so here is your quiz on the screen in front of you, but obviously find it in your revision guide as well. And let's have a go at the quiz. So looking, try and fill in the ones you can do, and then look through the revision guide and fill in any of the other answers. Ideally, have a bit of a good revision first, and then try the quiz and see how much you can remember. Okay, so pause me now and give it a go. Okay, so here's the answers then. So when did the USSR develop the atomic bomb? 1949, obviously in response to Truman detonating an atomic bomb in Hiroshima and becoming the biggest of superpowers. The Russians react and become a superpower in the nuclear age as well by 1949. And then America has to react. So Truman says, oh, Russia got a bomb. We need to be even better now. And they developed the H bomb, the hydrogen bomb, which was so much more powerful. And then shortly after, the Russians developed their own H bomb. So now they've got lots of nuclear weapons. The Americans, for question 3, develop MAD and a policy of mutually assured destruction. So if one person attacks you, you attack them back. And therefore, this is supposedly it's going to put each other off using nuclear bombs, because we are saying we're both going to wipe each other out. So there's no point doing it in the first place. Obviously, initially, bombs could be dropped by a plane, and they were made. The sort of technological revolution was to develop a plane to drop a bomb, to make the bombs lighter and easier to carry. But then the technology was about rockets and developing an ICBM, for question 4, a rocket capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Russia obviously developed their rockets quicker and better, as shown by the space race, and started to take over in the ICBM department. They also started to make much more powerful bombs, and question 5, name the powerful bomb detonated by the USSR in 1961, was Tsar Bomba. By this time, you've read, America had Polaris missiles in response to ICBM, so the arms race was really hotted up by the start of the early 60s. But people start to get worried about the arms race, and there's a social thing to this. So question 6, name the protest group developed around nuclear bombs, was CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And then the space race is quite connected to the arms race, as we talked about. The Russians get better at making rockets. They start to win the space race. So they put the first satellite in space, which is Sputnik, for question 7. The first human in space, for question 8, is Yuri Gagarin. But then America, the Cold War starts to change a little bit. It becomes a sort of competition about which society is best. And the American president wants to show America's best by getting a man on the moon first. And he announces this as their mission, their goal to achieve by the end of the 1960s. And the president who said this was John F. Kennedy. And eventually, yes, they did put the first man on the moon in 1969, and that was Neil Armstrong. Okay, so let's think about the question now in a bit more detail and start planning our response. So the question is, write an account of how the arms race increased Cold War tensions. So we've got your sort of planning box here. And remember, with the write an account question, it's about giving an explanation still. So we still want to do our P paragraphs. And you'll find obviously an explanation of how to do this in more detail in the Yalta and Potsdam video. But essentially, we want to still do our P paragraphs. We want to do an event in our evidence and then an impact in our explanation. So we're still doing a little bit of a story, but we can do it in a structured way to give event, then impact, to show our bit of our story of events. So let's think about the events then of the arms race we think are most important, and then we'll start to think about what the impact of those events are. So firstly, list some of the important events of the arms race you think sort of stand out in terms of creating Cold War tension. And I'll share a list with you in a moment. So pause now, come up with a list of the key events of the arms race. Okay, so here are my key events. I've got obviously the Russia becoming the second nuclear power in 1949. And then by 1953, both countries have hydrogen bombs. 1957, Russia sends a satellite to space and successfully launches ICBMs, so now they can attack with rockets. And by this time, Russia, it seems to have overtaken America, and America fears there might be a missile gap as well. And by 1959, USA launched their Polaris nuclear submarines, so they can just put a submarine off your sort of coastline and bombard you via rockets from short range. So what's the impact of these events? How do they start to cause Cold War tensions? Okay, so now think about each of these. How are they causing Cold War tensions? So list some of your ideas now in the impact box. Okay, so we've got some ideas. So here's some of my impacts then. So firstly, with both countries being nuclear powers, so this obviously meant there was an arms race at the beginning. And of course, both of them having lots of nuclear weapons meant that MAD developed, and people started to fear that there would be huge nuclear conflict between the two sides whenever they had a bit of an argument. So then we've got obviously the ICBMs and the space race. So the USA starts to fear they're losing the arms race, and therefore they develop more technology, in particular putting more missile bases in Europe and developing Polaris submarines. So now Russia feels surrounded. They feel under threat by these Polaris submarines, and perhaps this leads to some brinkmanship. And you could connect that to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Russia wants to have missiles in Cuba, and this leads to obviously a huge amount of tension around the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you could have a look at those pages to help you sort of give an answer around that. So what should our answer look like? So here's a bit of a writing frame then to remind you about how you might write your answer. So our simple peel paragraphs. So it says we firstly to give a point, and we might say one way the arms race increased Cold War tension was, and give our argument. So perhaps that is around there being more nuclear missiles and a fear of MAD might be a sensible idea to give. Then give some evidence about the nuclear missiles, then explain the impact of all those nuclear missiles and how this led to more tensions. How did the country react? Looking at our table of ideas. And then we could give a furthermore. Remember, our furthermores will be different people, places and times. We could link to other places in the world. We could link to a long-term idea. Somewhere in there, in one of our paragraphs, linking to the Cuban Missile Crisis would be a more complex idea to give. Perhaps we could link to a social idea of CND. So other people start to worry, not just politicians, and that will give us some more complexity. So let's start our answer then for the first paragraph. And in our plan, we talked about perhaps it's about both countries having lots of nuclear missiles and MAD. So maybe that's a good starting point to think about. So pause me now, and in your revision guide, fill in your first sentence, your point you're going to give. Okay, so here is my point. So, as I suggested a moment ago, one way the arms race increased Cold War tension was due to the USA developing the theory of MAD, mutually assured destruction. So let's give some evidence. How do we support that? You might have a different statement. That's fine. Give some evidence to support your statement. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. History is a beautiful subject where we can all have our own arguments. The skill we're being tested on here is how well we make our arguments. So now we need some evidence to back up this argument. So give some evidence to back up your argument now. Pause and give it a go. So here's my argument, and the key thing is just make sure you've got lots of facts and evidence to back up whatever argument you come up with. So I've said that, for example, by 1949 the Russians had developed their own atomic bombs, and by 1953 both USA and the Soviets had large amounts of nuclear bombs, including obviously hydrogen bombs as the most powerful weapon. So now we can explain. This led to increased Cold War tension because, so now look at your plan, give an impact to this. How is this creating more and more tension? How does the world start to fear MAD or whatever argument you've given? Okay, so start to explain your idea and the impact. Okay, so pause and give it a go. Okay, so here's my idea. I've said this led to increased Cold War tension because the Americans announced a policy of massive retaliation in 1955. This meant that any nuclear attack on the USA would result in full nuclear retaliation. This led to the world fearing that the world could be destroyed through MAD, mutually assured destruction. So I've given a basic explanation of mutually assured destruction, just as a simple explanation to start off with, and how the world started to fear things. So now I could go to a more advanced idea of and wider idea of tension developing. Okay, so perhaps I could link to social fear through CND, those types of ideas that are in the booklet, so that so to show that the whole world is feeling that tension. Okay, so you might have a different idea, but let's pause and give it a go now. Here's my idea then. I have gone for that social idea. So these are all sort of ideas you'll find in the revision guide. So furthermore, it led to more tension, as whenever an event of tension developed between East and West, people feared MAD. This was increased by the news and media. The film Dr. Strangelove made fun of the idea of a rogue person and how they could easily cause nuclear war. In wider social society, tension developed around with groups like CND being formed, leading marches and blockades against the government and military. So clearly people are fearing Cold War tensions as well. Okay, so now let's have a look at the second idea. And this idea, we could really be starting to have a look at how the arms race developed into more and more tension as the space race and the arms race developed. Okay, so maybe looking at the second idea we had about America fearing they were losing the arms race and the space race, and how this increased tension maybe with more brinkmanship developing, particularly around Cuba later on. So give an idea of your second paragraph now, and I'll show you my full answer. So pause and give this a bit of a go. You want to, if you're totally ready and you've really got everything organized, you want to try and write this paragraph in about 6 or 7 minutes, so you practice your timing as well. Okay, so pause and give it a go. So here's my paragraph. It's based on a plan we came up with. And as I said, I'm talking about increased tension and brinkmanship. So another way that the arms race increased Cold War tension was that by the late 1950s, the USA thought they were losing the arms race, and this led to increased brinkmanship. For example, during the 1950s, the Soviets were the first to send satellites into space and the first to develop ICBMs capable of delivering a nuclear warhead. Added to this, President Eisenhower was suspicious the Russians had more nuclear warheads and that America was losing the arms race. This led to increased Cold War tension because Americans reacted by having strategically placed missiles to increase their advantage over the Soviets. You could talk about a place like Britain and Turkey, of course. They developed Polaris submarines that could fire short-range nuclear missiles and added nuclear bases to Britain and Turkey to be able to destroy Russian targets from a shorter distance. So furthermore, it led to more tension. The Russians wanted to respond with their own short-range missiles, and in 1962 they tried to add missiles into Cuba, which was only 400 miles from Florida. This led to increased brinkmanship and the fear of war. Kennedy led a naval blockade of Soviet ships to Cuba, and the world sort of held its breath as they feared MAD. Okay, so that should give you a really strong answer, and we've linked there to a longer-term idea about how the arms race increased Cold War tensions. All right. Well, I hope you were successful in your second paragraph and you managed to get a really good answer put across about Cold War tensions in the arms race. Okay, keep working through the booklet. Do keep watching the videos. I'd recommend looking at them lots and lots of times to really get the information stuck in and the technique stuck in. And yeah, I shall see you again soon for another video. All right, bye-bye for now.